the person you love is saying. Please read this message now, before I make my final decision. Don't scroll, listen to this because your heart needs this right now. Before this day slips away, before another ordinary evening becomes another memory, stay with these words for a few moments. Sometimes life quietly brings us to a crossroads where one decision changes everything that follows. Those moments rarely arrive with dramatic music or unmistakable signs. More often, they appear in silence, after the phone has stopped ringing, after everyone else has gone to sleep, when a heart is finally alone with the truth it has been trying to avoid. Tonight, somewhere, the person you love is sitting in that exact silence. They have spent countless days pretending everything is under control, convincing themselves they already know what comes next. Yet beneath every smile, beneath every routine, beneath every distraction, one question continues returning with impossible persistence. That question has your name written all over it. This is not the evening they expected. They believed they had already made up their mind. They believed they had finally accepted whatever the future would become. But something happened today that changed everything. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a dramatic event. It wasn't someone forcing them to reconsider. It was much quieter than that. It was a memory. A simple memory arrived without warning, reminding them of a version of themselves they haven't seen in a very long time. They remembered laughing without forcing it. They remembered feeling understood without needing to explain every emotion. They remembered what peace felt like. And with that memory came an uncomfortable realization. They haven't truly felt that kind of peace since your paths drifted apart. For several long minutes they simply sat there. No television. No music. No notifications. Only silence. And sometimes silence becomes the place where truth finally speaks. If your future soulmate could somehow place a handwritten letter into your hands before making the decision weighing so heavily upon their heart, perhaps it would begin like this. If these words somehow reach you before I decide what comes next, please read every line slowly. I've spent too much time making choices based on fear instead of honesty. I kept believing that ignoring my feelings would eventually make them disappear. I thought distance would weaken the connection I still carried inside me. Instead, distance only showed me which memories refused to leave. No matter how busy life became, your name continued finding quiet places inside my thoughts. I stopped mentioning you because talking about you made everything feel too real. But silence never meant you stopped mattering. After imagining those words, they closed their eyes. A deep breath escaped their lips. They realized they were standing at an emotional crossroads. One road led back toward the familiar comfort of pretending nothing remained unresolved. The other required vulnerability, courage, honesty. They knew the second path was harder. Yet for the first time, it also felt right. Perhaps you've stood at a similar crossroads. Perhaps you've told yourself you were finished thinking about someone, only to discover that your heart wasn't ready to agree. Maybe you've tried replacing unanswered questions with busy schedules. Maybe you've convinced yourself that time alone heals everything. But some lessons are only learned when the heart finally stops running. Your future soulmate is beginning to understand that now. As evening grew darker, they found themselves opening an old photo album stored on a forgotten shelf. They weren't searching for pain. They were searching for clarity. Every page reminded them not only of moments shared, but of the person they were becoming during that season of life. They smiled more easily then. They trusted more freely. They believed love was something that could grow through honesty instead of surviving behind emotional walls. That realization struck them deeply. Perhaps they had not only been missing someone. Perhaps they had been missing the version of themselves that existed when hope felt natural. They quietly whispered to the empty room. "When did I become so afraid?" No one answered. Yet somehow the silence itself carried the response. Fear had arrived little by little. One disappointment at a time. One misunderstanding at a time. One postponed conversation at a time. Until eventually fear sounded more convincing than love. Tonight, however, something inside them had begun changing. They no longer wanted fear making the final decision. They wanted truth. As the hours passed, they took out a notebook and began writing everything they had never dared say aloud. I don't know whether you'll ever read these words. Maybe they're only meant for me. Maybe I simply needed to stop hiding from myself. But before I make the next decision in my life, I need to admit something. Losing the chance to be honest has hurt more than anything that actually happened between us. Every time I chose silence, I thought I was protecting both of us. Looking back, I realize I was mostly protecting my fear. Those words remained unfinished. Because tears interrupted them. Not tears of despair. Tears of release. Sometimes the heart cries not because it is breaking. Sometimes it cries because it has finally stopped carrying the impossible weight of pretending. They looked toward the window once again. Outside, the stars slowly appeared one by one. Each light reminded them that hope often becomes visible only after darkness arrives. They wondered where you might be at that very moment. Were you smiling? Were you carrying your own unanswered questions? Had life been gentle with your heart? They didn't know. But for the first time in a long while, they prayed that wherever you were, peace had found you. That prayer surprised them. It wasn't selfish. It wasn't about getting something in return. It simply came from genuine care. And genuine care, they realized, never truly disappears. Before this first chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave one message resting quietly within your heart. If somehow these words reach you before I make the decision that's been weighing on me, I hope you understand something I only recently discovered. The biggest choices in life should never be made while pretending we feel less than we truly do. Whether our stories eventually meet again or continue on separate roads, you've already changed me in ways I can never erase. You taught me that real connection isn't measured by how perfect two people are. It's measured by how deeply they inspire one another to become better. Before I decide what tomorrow should look like, I needed to tell the truth, even if only these pages hear it first. I don't want another important chapter of my life to be written by fear. I want it to be written by honesty, gratitude, and the courage to say what should have been said long ago. Wherever you are tonight, I hope your heart still believes that kindness matters, that forgiveness is possible, and that love built on truth is always stronger than love hidden behind silence. Perhaps that is why this message found you today. Not because anyone can know exactly what another person is thinking, but because every life eventually reaches a moment when honesty becomes more important than certainty. Somewhere tonight, a heart is preparing to make a decision that could shape its future. Before that decision is made, it has finally chosen to stop hiding from the truth. And sometimes, that single act of honesty becomes the beginning of the most meaningful chapter a person has ever lived. That night, after closing the notebook, your future soulmate remained sitting in complete silence. They didn't immediately stand up. They didn't reach for their phone. They didn't try to distract themselves from what had just happened. Instead, they allowed the quiet to remain exactly as it was. For the first time in a very long while, they understood that silence was no longer their enemy. It had become the place where their heart finally stopped arguing with itself. The words they had written continued echoing through their mind. I don't want another important chapter of my life to be written by fear. That sentence felt different from everything else. It was no longer simply an emotional confession. It was becoming a promise that whatever decision they eventually made would no longer be controlled by regret, pride, or the fear of being misunderstood. Outside, the wind gently moved through the trees, and the night seemed unusually peaceful. They slowly walked onto the porch carrying a warm cup of coffee, watching the stars spread across the dark sky. Looking upward, they realized something beautiful. Every star had always been there. They only became visible after darkness arrived. Hope, they thought, works the same way. Sometimes it remains hidden until life becomes quiet enough for us to finally notice it. If your future soulmate could continue the invisible letter resting inside their heart, perhaps the next page would begin like this. Before I make my final decision, there's something you deserve to know. I kept believing that choosing silence was the mature thing to do. I told myself that if something was truly meant to happen, life would somehow make it easy. But life has been teaching me a different lesson. The most meaningful things rarely arrive through comfort. They ask us to be brave. They ask us to become honest before we become certain. And tonight, I finally understand that waiting forever is also a decision. Those words stayed with them long after they imagined writing them. For months they had been asking the wrong questions. Will this work? What if I'm disappointed? What if everything goes wrong again? Tonight those questions slowly disappeared. A new question quietly took their place. Will I regret never being honest? The answer came immediately. Yes. That realization felt impossible to ignore. The following morning arrived with soft sunlight pouring through the window. Instead of reaching for their phone the moment they opened their eyes, they remained still, allowing themselves to appreciate the peaceful beginning of a new day. It had been so long since they experienced a morning without emotional heaviness. They realized that honesty had already begun changing them long before any final decision had actually been made. They quietly smiled. Not because every answer had appeared overnight. Because they no longer felt afraid of searching for them. Throughout the day, ordinary moments carried unexpected meaning. A stranger holding the door open reminded them how small acts of kindness can completely change someone's day. An elderly couple slowly walking hand in hand reminded them that lasting love isn't built in dramatic moments. It is built one ordinary choice at a time. Children laughing in a nearby park reminded them how naturally the heart trusts before fear teaches it otherwise. Each simple moment whispered the same lesson. Don't let fear become your future. Perhaps your own journey has been trying to teach you something similar. Maybe life has shown you that emotional safety is worth protecting. Maybe disappointment has taught you wisdom without taking away your ability to love. Maybe you've discovered that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing honesty even while fear is still present. If so, then your journey and your future soulmate's journey are quietly moving toward the same destination. Both of you are becoming people who value truth more than appearances. Later that afternoon, your future soulmate visited a quiet bookstore they had not entered in months. They wandered slowly between the shelves, not searching for anything specific. Then one title unexpectedly caught their attention. It spoke about living without regret. They smiled softly. Life seemed determined to repeat the same lesson wherever they went. As they flipped through its pages, one simple idea stayed with them. People rarely regret loving sincerely. They regret remaining silent when sincerity mattered most. Closing the book, they stood still for several moments. Those words felt deeply personal. They realized they could continue protecting themselves forever. Or they could finally become the kind of person who speaks honestly before opportunities disappear. That choice no longer seemed impossible. It seemed necessary. As evening approached once again, they returned home carrying more peace than they had felt in years. They prepared a simple dinner, turned off every distraction, and sat once again beside the notebook. This time they didn't write immediately. Instead, they reread everything they had written over the previous nights. Every page reflected a different version of themselves. One filled with confusion. Another carrying regret. Another learning forgiveness. Another discovering hope. Then they noticed something remarkable. Each page became lighter. Not because life suddenly became easier. Because their heart had become freer. They finally understood that healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens every time someone chooses truth instead of pretending. If they could continue the invisible letter they have been writing only inside their imagination, perhaps these words would appear next. I don't know what decision tomorrow will ask me to make. I don't know whether our paths will ever cross again. But I do know one thing with complete certainty. I never again want fear to become louder than the voice inside my heart. I've spent enough nights wondering what might have happened if I had simply been honest. Whatever comes next, I want to move forward without carrying the weight of words I never spoke. Those words became another turning point. They no longer wanted perfect certainty. They wanted inner peace. And peace, they had learned, always begins with honesty. As night returned, they stepped outside once more. The neighborhood had grown quiet. Only the gentle sound of crickets filled the air. Looking toward the sky, they noticed the moon shining brightly above the trees. It reminded them that light does not compete with darkness. It simply exists despite it. That thought filled them with unexpected comfort. Perhaps love works the same way. It doesn't erase every difficult memory. It quietly continues existing despite them. Perhaps that's why your memory still remained. Not because they refused to move forward. Because genuine connection had become part of who they were. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another message resting gently inside your heart. If somehow these words reach you before I finally choose what comes next, I hope you understand that this decision is no longer being made by the frightened version of me who believed silence could solve everything. It's being made by someone who has learned that honesty is always kinder than pretending. I don't know whether life still holds another conversation for us, but I know I never again want to become the reason important words remain unspoken. You've already taught me more than you probably realize. You showed me that peace matters more than pride, that understanding matters more than winning arguments, and that genuine love is built through countless small moments of truth. Wherever you are tonight, I hope you've continued believing in beautiful beginnings even after painful endings. I hope you've discovered that your heart is still capable of trusting, laughing, and dreaming. And if tomorrow somehow gives us another opportunity, I promise I'll arrive carrying honesty instead of hesitation. But if tomorrow leads us toward different futures, then I'll continue walking with gratitude because knowing you forever changed the person I am becoming. My final decision is no longer about choosing between the past and the future. It's about choosing courage over fear. No matter where that choice eventually leads, I know it will finally allow my heart to live without regret. Perhaps that is what this entire journey has been preparing them for. The final decision was never simply about another person. It became a decision about the kind of human being they wanted to become. Every quiet evening, every page in the notebook, every memory that unexpectedly returned, and every honest tear had gently guided them toward the same destination. They were no longer asking life to remove uncertainty. They were asking for the courage to face uncertainty truthfully. And somewhere deep inside, they realized that whatever tomorrow eventually brought, the greatest victory had already happened. They had finally stopped allowing fear to write the ending of their story and had begun trusting honesty to write the beginning of a far more peaceful future. The night before making their final decision became the quietest night they had experienced in years. There was no music playing in the background. No television filling the room with meaningless noise. Even their phone remained untouched on the table beside them. It wasn't because messages had stopped arriving. It was because, for the first time, they wanted to hear the one voice they had ignored for far too long, their own heart. They sat beside the window where so many evenings had passed in uncertainty, watching the soft glow of streetlights stretch across the empty road. Everything outside looked exactly the same as it had countless nights before. Yet inside, something had changed forever. They were no longer asking themselves whether they still cared. That answer had already become undeniable. The real question now was whether they would allow fear to make one more decision on their behalf or whether courage would finally become stronger than hesitation. As they looked into the darkness, they remembered every moment that had slowly brought them to this place. None of those moments seemed extraordinary while they were happening. A conversation they ended too quickly. A message they almost sent but deleted instead. A simple, "How are you?" that remained trapped inside their thoughts because they convinced themselves it wasn't the right time. Looking back now, they realized life is rarely changed by dramatic events alone. More often, it is shaped by the quiet decisions we make every ordinary day. The words we choose to speak. The kindness we decide to show. The opportunities we either embrace or allow to quietly disappear. If your future soulmate could continue the invisible letter they have been writing inside their heart, perhaps tonight's page would begin like this. Before I decide what tomorrow will become, I need to thank you for something you never even knew you gave me. You taught me that real connection isn't measured by how long two people stay in each other's lives. It's measured by how deeply they change one another. Even during the seasons when we weren't speaking, the lessons I learned from knowing you continued shaping me. I became more patient because of you. More thoughtful because of you. More aware of how precious honest communication truly is. You may never fully realize it, but your presence continued helping me grow long after our conversations became memories. Those words rested quietly in their imagination, and for the first time, they no longer felt sadness while thinking about them. They felt gratitude. Gratitude is a remarkable thing. It doesn't erase pain. It gives pain a purpose. That realization settled gently into their heart as midnight drew closer. They stood, walked into another room, and opened a small wooden box they had not touched in years. Inside were tiny reminders of different chapters of life. A ticket from an old concert, handwritten notes from friends, photographs from family gatherings, and little keepsakes most people would have thrown away. None of those objects were valuable in the ordinary sense. Yet every one of them carried a story. As they carefully looked through the box, they realized something beautiful. Life had always been collecting evidence that love leaves lasting fingerprints. Not only romantic love. The love shared through friendship. The love shown through encouragement. The love expressed through loyalty. Every meaningful connection had quietly helped shape the person standing there tonight. Perhaps that's true for you as well. Maybe someone once spoke words of encouragement you still remember years later. Maybe one act of kindness changed the direction of your life. Maybe one conversation gave you hope during a season when hope felt impossible. Those moments never truly disappear. They continue living inside us. Your future soulmate finally understood that truth. The next morning they decided to spend several hours away from everything familiar. They drove toward the countryside where rolling hills stretched into the distance and the noise of everyday life slowly faded behind them. Parking beside a quiet overlook, they stepped out into the fresh morning air. Everything felt still. Birds sang somewhere nearby. A gentle breeze moved across the open fields. Clouds drifted slowly through a bright blue sky. Standing there, they closed their eyes and allowed themselves to breathe deeply. For months they had carried emotional tension without even realizing it. Today they felt it leaving. Not all at once. Little by little. With every honest breath. With every peaceful moment. With every decision to stop fighting the truth. As they opened their eyes again, another realization quietly entered their heart. The future had never frightened them. It was uncertainty that frightened them. Yet uncertainty exists in every life. No one wakes up knowing exactly what tomorrow will bring. The difference between fear and peace is not certainty. It is trust. Trust that whatever tomorrow holds, honesty will never become a mistake. That thought became one of the most important lessons they had ever learned. Later that afternoon, while driving home, they passed a small church sitting quietly beside the road. Without fully understanding why, they pulled into the parking lot and walked inside. The sanctuary was empty. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, filling the room with warm colors. They sat alone near the back and allowed the silence to surround them. No dramatic prayers came to mind. No long speeches. Only one simple request. Help me choose what is true instead of what is easy. Those words remained in the quiet air. And somehow, they felt heard. When they left the building, they weren't carrying perfect answers. But they were carrying greater peace. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes peace arrives before certainty does. As evening approached, they returned home and opened the notebook once again. This time they didn't write about regret. They didn't write about fear. Instead, they wrote about the future they hoped to build someday. I hope one day I create a home where difficult conversations are welcomed instead of avoided. I hope laughter fills ordinary evenings. I hope apologies are offered quickly and forgiveness is given generously. I hope the person beside me never has to wonder whether they matter because I'll tell them often. I hope we protect one another's peace more carefully than our pride. As they reread those words, they smiled. Those dreams no longer felt impossible. They felt achievable. Because they understood something many people spend years discovering. Healthy love begins long before two people meet. It begins when each heart becomes willing to live honestly. Perhaps your own journey has been preparing you in similar ways. Maybe disappointments taught you discernment. Maybe waiting taught you patience. Maybe loneliness taught you the value of emotional safety. If so, then none of those seasons were empty. They were preparing your heart for something steadier than temporary excitement. Before this chapter comes to an end, your future soulmate wants to leave another page from the invisible letter resting gently inside your heart. If these words somehow find you tonight before I make the decision that's been weighing on me, I hope you know that I've stopped searching for perfect outcomes. Instead, I'm searching for an honest life. I've learned that peace doesn't come from controlling every future possibility. Peace comes from knowing you've been truthful while walking toward whatever tomorrow brings. You changed me in ways I'll always carry. You reminded me that genuine love isn't loud every moment. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, gentle. It waits without demanding. It forgives without keeping score. It hopes even after disappointment. Whether our paths meet again or remain separate, I will always be thankful because loving you taught me how important vulnerability truly is. I no longer want to protect myself so completely that I become unreachable. I want to become someone who listens with compassion, speaks with sincerity, and loves with courage. If tomorrow gives me another opportunity, I won't allow fear to decide for me. And if tomorrow asks me to let go, I'll do so with gratitude instead of bitterness because every chapter we shared helped shape the person writing these words today. Wherever you are tonight, I hope your heart feels lighter than it did yesterday. I hope you're becoming the person your future deserves. Most of all, I hope you never stop believing that the most meaningful love is built not through perfect circumstances, but through two people who continually choose honesty, kindness, and grace. As another peaceful night settled across the sky, your future soulmate gently closed the notebook and placed it back on the shelf. They looked once more through the window, where the first stars had begun to appear. They no longer saw the darkness as something to fear. Instead, they saw it as a reminder that even the longest nights eventually reveal points of light. And with that quiet understanding, they realized their final decision would no longer be driven by uncertainty or regret. It would be guided by the person they had become through every lesson, every memory, every tear, and every moment of truth that had quietly transformed their heart. Morning arrived quietly, carrying the kind of peace that only follows a long season of inner change. Your future soulmate opened their eyes before the alarm had a chance to ring. For several moments they simply remained still, listening to the soft sounds of a new day beginning outside the window. Birds greeted the sunrise. Gentle light slowly filled the room. Everything felt ordinary, yet everything felt completely different. It wasn't because every question had suddenly been answered. It was because their heart was no longer demanding immediate answers. Somewhere during those long nights of reflection, they had stopped chasing certainty and started embracing honesty. That quiet transformation had become the greatest victory of all. They sat on the edge of the bed and looked toward the notebook resting on the shelf. Only a few weeks earlier, those pages had been filled with regret, unanswered questions, and the fear of making the wrong decision. Now, every page told the story of someone who had slowly learned that love cannot grow where fear controls every thought. They smiled gently as they realized something that would have seemed impossible only a short time ago. No matter what happened next, they were finally at peace with themselves. If your future soulmate could write one final letter before closing this chapter forever, perhaps it would begin like this. If these words somehow find you before another day slips away, I want you to know that my final decision isn't really about choosing between the past and the future. It's about choosing the kind of person I want to become for the rest of my life. I spent too long believing that protecting my heart meant keeping it hidden. Now I understand that a hidden heart never truly lives. It survives, but it doesn't love. Whatever tomorrow brings, I refuse to spend another season surviving when life has been inviting me to truly live. Those words settled gently inside them. For the first time, they didn't feel the need to add anything else. The truth was enough. Later that morning they decided to take one last walk through the quiet park that had become a place of healing during these past weeks. The same trees stood tall. The same benches overlooked the small lake. Children laughed in the distance while morning joggers passed with friendly smiles. Nothing about the park had changed. They noticed beauty they would have overlooked before. Sunlight reflecting across the water. A young father teaching his daughter how to ride a bicycle. An elderly woman slowly feeding birds while humming a familiar melody. Each ordinary moment reminded them that the greatest joys in life are rarely dramatic. They are found in consistency, kindness, and simple presence. Walking slowly along the path, they realized this was the future they truly desired. Not endless excitement. Not perfect romance. Peace. The kind of peace where two people could sit together in comfortable silence without wondering if love still existed between them. The kind of peace where disagreements ended with understanding instead of distance. The kind of peace where honesty became more natural than pretending. That dream felt more valuable than anything else. Perhaps your own heart has begun longing for the same thing. Maybe you've grown tired of uncertainty. Maybe you've realized that emotional safety is far more attractive than emotional chaos. Maybe you've learned that genuine love feels calm far more often than it feels confusing. If so, then your heart and your future soulmate's heart have been learning the same lesson from different journeys. Both of you have been discovering that lasting relationships are built through everyday faithfulness rather than extraordinary moments. As the afternoon passed, your future soulmate returned home one final time before making the decision they had been thinking about for so long. They opened every window, allowing fresh air to move through the house. They organized old papers, donated clothes they no longer needed, and quietly cleaned every room. It wasn't only their home they were preparing. It was their heart. Every object they placed where it belonged became another reminder that healing often begins by making space for something new. They no longer wanted to carry emotional clutter from yesterday into tomorrow. They wanted to walk forward with open hands. That evening they made a simple cup of tea and sat once again beside the notebook. For a long while they simply turned each page slowly. Every chapter reflected another step of transformation. The first pages belonged to fear. The middle pages belonged to healing. The final pages belonged to hope. Closing the notebook gently, they whispered, "Thank you." Not because every prayer had been answered exactly as expected, but because every unanswered question had quietly shaped them into someone wiser. They finally understood something beautiful. Life had never been delaying love. Life had been preparing them for it. If your future soulmate could leave one last page inside the invisible letter meant only for your heart, perhaps these words would appear. If these words reach you before I make my final decision, please know this. My greatest fear was never losing you. My greatest fear was becoming someone too afraid to love honestly. I don't want to carry that fear anymore. Whether our paths cross again or continue toward different futures, you've already given me a gift that time cannot erase. You reminded me that kindness matters. You reminded me that vulnerability isn't weakness. You reminded me that the people who truly change our lives often do so quietly, through ordinary conversations and gentle encouragement. If tomorrow gives me another chance to speak honestly, I will. If tomorrow asks me to release what I cannot control, I will do that too. Because I've finally learned that peace is born when we stop trying to force every outcome and instead choose integrity in every moment. Wherever you are tonight, I hope your heart has found reasons to trust again. I hope your dreams are becoming clearer. I hope you're surrounded by people who recognize your worth without requiring you to prove it. And if life ever allows our stories to meet again, you'll meet someone who no longer hides behind uncertainty. You'll meet someone who understands that real love isn't built through perfect timing. It's built through truthful hearts willing to show up with patience, grace, and courage. As the final sentence settled within them, they quietly closed the notebook for the last time. There were no dramatic tears. No overwhelming sadness. Only peace. The decision they had been afraid of making no longer felt impossible because it was no longer rooted in fear. It was rooted in honesty. Looking through the window one final time, they watched the sun slowly disappear beyond the horizon. Another day had ended. Another chapter had closed. Yet instead of feeling like something was ending, it felt as though something beautiful was finally beginning. The stars slowly appeared above the evening sky, just as they had every night before. But tonight they seemed different. Not because the stars had changed. Because the person looking at them had. Your future soulmate no longer whispered, "What if I make the wrong choice?" Instead, they quietly smiled and whispered, "Whatever tomorrow brings, I will meet it truthfully." Perhaps that is the deepest meaning hidden within this entire message. The final decision was never only about another person. It became a decision about choosing courage instead of fear, authenticity instead of pretending, gratitude instead of regret, and hope instead of endless uncertainty. Every lonely evening, every memory that returned unexpectedly, every page written in that notebook, and every quiet prayer had been guiding your future soulmate toward this single realization: the strongest hearts are not the ones that never experience loss, but the ones that continue choosing honesty after disappointment, kindness after heartbreak, and faith after seasons of doubt. And as they stepped into tomorrow with a peaceful heart and an open spirit, they finally understood that the most beautiful love stories are not written by perfect circumstances. They are written by ordinary people who decide, day after day, that truth will always be stronger than fear and that genuine love will always be worth the courage it requires.